All right, getting set up for the Ritualist. Actually, shouldn't take too long. But this one's, I mean, all of the specs that we previewed so far have been pretty exciting. I'm even more excited to show off the Ritualist here today. Guild Wars 1 fans, you need to keep track of all the Guild Wars references in the Guild Wars 2 version of the Ritualist. There are quite a few of them. I will call out a few of them here and there, but not every single one, because I would just never stop saying, oh look, a reference to a Guild Wars 1 skill. But yeah, let's talk about Ritualist. So we talked about this in the blog, the general mechanics around the spirits and how they work and how they're tied to Ritualist Shroud. The first thing we see here that when we equip the spec, we have access to F2, F3, F4. This is actually coming from the Grandmaster Minor trait. But these are what we're calling the Rupture Skills. It's kind of a callback to a skill called Rupture Soul, which was destroy a spirit, and that one I believe just did damage around the spirit. But we're going to have 3 different flavors of these ruptures for each of the spirits. You will have Rupture Anguish, Rupture Wonderlust, and Rupture Preservation. These will obviously destroy that respective spirit and do some powerful effect around that area. So we see here Rupture Anguish, this is going to be your big damage one, give some offensive boons to nearby allies. As we mentioned in the blog, we're kind of expecting that a power DPS build will exist for the Ritualist as well as a more healy support build. So offensive boons valuable in both those cases as well. Rupturing your Wanderlust, this is going to be more of that CC spirit that we'll see once we get into Shroud. This is going to do that AoE fear. There's not going to be any fear in the Shroud itself, but we will see that on the Rupture here. And finally, when you Rupture the Spirit of Preservation, this is just going to give some really strong defensive boons, as you might expect from a powerful defensive spirit, giving Aegis resistance and stability to your nearby allies. So let's just hop into Shroud and start talking about how things kind of work in here. We're going to see, I'll just start off with Anguish. This is the one that we talked about. Whoop, that string has not been encrypted yet. But it is now. It's fine. No one saw that. But as we mentioned in the blog, Spirit of Anguish is kind of your bread and butter DPS skill, where you're going to spawn in Anguish. It's going to do a big attack. This is kind of similar to how Mesmer Phantasms work, where the spirit will come in, do a big attack. Also, you, the Ritualist, are going to be doing some relevant component to your skill as well. We see here with Anguish, this is just setting up more of a setup thing. I'm going to be inflicting Cripple, Vuln, applying Painful Bond. That's going to be a skill that causes my summoned creatures, which includes spirits and minions. Those are both going to deal increased damage to this target. And then we see Anguish spawns, does its big attack. This one, basically the big damage skill, does a barrage of projectiles. Increased damage to crowd control foes, increased damage per condition on those target. You know, Spirit of Anguish in Guild Wars did increased damage to hexed foes, so we see kind of a nice nod to that on the big damage skill here, Spirit of Anguish. Notably, the spirits are not targetable. They're not really attackable or destroyable, but that is why they exist as long as you are in Shroud. We thought about this a lot as we were building the Ritualist and thinking about, obviously in Guild Wars 1, spirits were more of that engineered turret type of gameplay, at least the offensive ones, where they would exist and be attackable and destroyable. So the counterplay was destroy the spirit. Tying it into Shroud, I guess I forgot to mention that we tied it into Shroud because this is kind of the more iconic thing that Ritualists do. We wanted to make sure that when you're playing Ritualist, you have access to these spirits, so tying them into Shroud also gave us that extra lever of, well, now the counterplay to these spirits is pressure the Ritualist out of Shroud. So these spirits are kind of sustained by your life force. As long as you are in Shroud, these spirits will exist. We see a little periodic auto attack coming out here that's going to do a little bit less damage than, say, the barrage, but as long as you're in Shroud, that's a little bit, range on that is a little weird. We'll fix that one for sure. Anguish didn't find something close enough to it to attack, but we'll see that mark here in just a second. The idea, again, just to summarize, Ritualist does a component of their skill, the spirit spawns, does its big attack, and then transitions into this more passive state as long as you are in Shroud, periodically doing a more basic attack on your enemies. So with all that said, now we can move back to the auto attack here, Essence Blast. This is pretty similar to like a core Necro auto attack. It is going to do a little AoE explosion around the target, but it is going to get more powerful for each spirit that you have in the world. So we see kind of the weakest version here as we use that. Then we're going to spawn Anguish, spawn Wonderlust at a terrible location because we just want to increase our Essence Blast damage, and now we see just a bit more damage coming out from that Essence Blast. So nothing too crazy, you know, a basic ranged projectile skill to complement kind of this ranged, obviously with the ranged Anguish, you have the ranged Wanderlust placement. You can detonate all these spirits, get those powerful effects. One thing I did not mention about the Ruptures initially is that these will automatically activate when the spirit expires. So if we just spawn Anguish, we didn't really find a great opportunity to use the Rupture that we wanted to. When we're exiting Shroud, that spirit's going to explode. That's going to trigger the Rupture Anguish, and if I wasn't cheating, you would see that skill actually go on cooldown. Except I pressed it manually. Great demonstration here by CMC. Let's take a look at this one. There we see Rupture Wanderlust going on recharge without being pressed because it is going to just trigger automatically when the spirit expires. So next up, let's actually take a look at what Wonderlust does. Some people may remember the spirit name from Guild Wars as well. A spirit that knocked down enemies, I believe, if they were moving. Not a great mechanic that translates too well into our game. So Wonderlust just going to come in, it's going to knock enemies down, and then create kind of this pulsing area that's going to inflict a few different unique conditions, do a bit of damage as well. And we saw the initial Ritualist side of this attack is more of that Ritualist lightning that, you know, was definitely seen on a few of those more offensive skills from Guild Wars. And that's going to do a nice little AoE damage and some daze. We do see here that if I use the spirit skill while the spirit is still active, it's going to destroy that spirit, triggering the Rupture skill, and then spawn a new spirit at the new location. That's obviously a lot more important when I'm cheating, but we will actually see some fun traits in the future that may run into this mechanic. Get a closer up on some of these spirit attacks. We saw Rupture Anguish triggering as well. Wanderlust getting this nice little pulsing area. And the last spirit we have here, the Spirit of Preservation. Periodically healed in Guild Wars 1. Here we're going to have the Ritualist side of this giving AoE protection and vigor. And then Spirit of Preservation will pop in, do a little bit of healing. Let's heal some allies that actually have damage taken. Notably, we did make kind of an exception to the typical Death Shroud rules for the Ritualists themselves, whereas this is mostly a normal Shroud where the damage is taken against the life force pool and you can't be healed, but there are a few exceptions where we are allowing the Ritualists to heal themselves. We'll see here with Preservation, that's going to be a heal that goes through that, but other people still won't be able to heal you. It felt, you know, a little weird that you would have a skill in a Shroud that said heal yourself and nearby allies and it just wouldn't do anything. So we're trying that out, seeing if that doesn't break things too horribly, and you will be able to have that kind of self-sustain here in Shroud. Notably, the Spirit of Preservation's basic attack will do a small amount of healing as well to nearby allies, in addition to doing a bit less damage than the other two. One thing I didn't mention about the auto attack Essence Blast is that this will kind of mark an enemy for your spirits to prioritize. So if the spirits find an enemy nearby that has this mark, their basic attacks will be focused on that target. If not, then they're just going to be looking at they're going to find some nearby enemy to attack. But if you want to focus these attacks on a particular enemy, just hit them with Essence Blast. Nothing too crazy. And last up, we have Summon Spirits. This one's going to be more of that utility-focused mobility skill. We're just going to see here that it's a ground target shadow step, so good with like Z-axis situations. But the fun part here is that your spirits will all come with you. And if they aren't currently doing something, that will also trigger a basic attack. So you do have an opportunity to get like an extra burst of damage as maybe your spirits do their auto attack, then you teleport in with Summon Spirits as well, and they will do an auto attack again for a little bit of extra damage or a little bit of extra heal. So that's kind of how the spirits work and how the Shroud works and all the ruptures and all the stuff around that. So I'm going to take a quick water break before we hop into the utility skills, which are weapon spells, another thing that some people might recognize.
I think to me, the interesting part about Ritualist Shroud is that it is pretty similar to core Necromancer Shroud. I think, as we've gone through the elite specializations, Reaper was heavily melee focused. Scourge didn't have a Shroud exactly, and then Harbinger doesn't have that health effect that normal Necromancer Shrouds have. So something that's pretty similar to what Necromancers played for with a while is what really interests me the most about Ritualist spec and how we can, have another ranged Shroud that also replaces your health pool and back to that kind of core Necromancer gameplay.
Yeah, for sure. And like, range support is just going to be a little bit more useful than melee support. So weapon spells, we talked about this. Let's just hover one of these while we ramble a little bit. We talked about this a little bit in the blog as well, where this is obviously another mechanic that existed in Guild Wars 1, but the way that these skills work in Guild Wars 1 is that they were ally-targeted skills. You would affect a single ally, grant them this effect, and, they were all pretty powerful, but we've kind of seen the difficulties around ally-targeted skills so far in Guild Wars 2. So we're going to have a little bit different implementation here, where these are going to give an AoE effect around you. All your allies are going to get the weapon spell effect, while the Ritualists themselves will get a full power effect. So we see here with Resilient Weapon, this is going to be a damage reduction. It's going to be a pulse heal. Might sound a little bit familiar, even though it works slightly differently. But pulse healing, damage reduction, increase below 50% health, and you're going to get 6 seconds of this as the... Let me just make sure I'm not going to die. As the Ritualist, you will be giving yourself 6 seconds of this, and then we'll be giving 3 seconds of this to allies. So they're going to get a little bit less duration of the damage reduction, a little bit less healing overall. But then it's going to be more easily usable, and like you're going to be able to give this to all your allies as opposed to having to work with that more difficult ally targeting mechanic. And we're going to see a couple different flavors of these, as with the Guild Wars 1 weapon spells. Some are going to feel a little bit more like stances, with the duration based, whereas some are going to feel a little bit more like venoms. Maybe one called Splinter Weapon. It had to be here. Is anyone surprised that Splinter Weapon is basically the same skill as it was in Guild Wars 1, because that effect translates really well into Guild Wars 2, where you are going to have this additional AoE strike around enemies that you strike. You're going to give some of this to enemies. You're going to give this something to your allies, so everyone can have the Splinter Weapon at the same time, and that's potentially a lot of extra splash damage hits. Maybe you can give it to a ranger and they can cast Barrage, and it will behave slightly differently than Guild Wars 1 Barrage, but you can, in fact, Splinter Barrage in Guild Wars 2 as soon as Ritualist is available in the beta. So notably here, you give yourself 5 stacks of Splinter Weapon, allies get 3 stacks of Splinter Weapon, slight reduction. Maybe you have minions, you can give your minions Splinter Weapon. That's a little bit scary, but we will see a couple of nods to minions. Vaguely, we're going to do things that affect creatures. We saw that with Painful Bond. We have some that care about a spirit or a minion, because, that is another thing that it's not only because it's a Guild Wars callback. We have a lot of elite specs that don't really care about minions. So as we're building out the Ritualist, we knew that there's a lot of associations already. Obviously, the spawning power attribute in Guild Wars 1 made your minions more powerful, and there were other things that cared about summon creatures in Guild Wars 1. We'll see that a lot more in the traits as well. So there is kind of that opportunity to play with some minions, play with Splinter Weapon, give your minions Splinter Weapon, and that is potentially really fun, potentially a lot of damage, and we do want to lean into that opportunity for minions to be a more viable playstyle with Ritualist especially. So we saw Splinter Weapon. Next we'll see Nightmare Weapon, another one that translates pretty well. This is going to be more of that defensive. You have some lifesteal, but the big thing here is going to be a pretty meaty heal. Allies are obviously going to get a lower duration of this, but you will just get some extra lifestealing off of your strikes. Maybe I should take some damage so I can actually get some value out of my lifesteal. But here we see that's obviously triggering off Life Siphon as well, getting even more healing, but this is a nice little self-survivability tool. Obviously, you can give it to your allies as well. They're going to get a little bit of healing there, and you're also going to stack up a bunch of vulnerability on your enemy. Next up, we'll take a look at the Weapon of Remedy. This is going to be more of that condition removal type of effect. This is going to be another one of those duration-based buffs, where every second you're going to remove a condition from yourself or from the allies that are affected by this, and every time that you do remove a condition, it will give you a little bit of healing. So a nice little, pretty low duration, that nice little cleanse over time with a little extra on top with that nice little heal. Last up, we have Weapon of Warding. This is another one that is, a pretty iconic weapon spell. So we wanted to find a way to translate into Guild Wars 2, and, blocking attack 50% of the time, maybe not the best mechanic for this game, so we're not doing anything like that. This is just going to be a stack-based block similar to like the Arcane Shields or the Shield of Wraths of the Guild Wars 2 universe. We're going to see you're going to get 3 block stacks. Allies are going to get a single stack of that blocking buff. And, there's a little bit of regen in there. Grant a little bit less regen to your allies. When this expires, that's also going to be giving protection. So whether that expires on timeout or because your ally blocked or you blocked, giving that protection at the end because, you don't really need it when you're blocking attacks most of the time. And last up, we have kind of an exciting mechanic. Exciting new mechanic that is, again, kind of inspired by Guild Wars 1 pretty heavily. There's going to be Zinray's weapon or Zinrai's weapon. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sure chat knows whether it's Zinray's or Zinrai's. I always say Zinray. But the idea here is that this is going to give you stacks of a buff. Allies will get a single stack, you will get 2 stacks of this buff. And this buff says that when you take damage over a percentage of your maximum health, it is going to heal for the difference. This is slightly different than how the mechanic worked in Guild Wars. We saw this on stuff like Protective Spirit, Protective Bond, obviously Zinrai's weapon. It is a pretty interesting defensive tool. We wanted to try it out. It's a little scary as well, so it is on the elite skill here, and there are... I mentioned the implementation here is a little bit different so that there are kind of additional holes in here. This is not going to just set that incoming damage to 5% because this way, if you take a lethal strike, you will actually die. This won't prevent you from getting, killed by a boss attack that says you die instantly, or it does just so much damage that you are going to die from the strike. But if you survive the strike and it did more than 5% of your max health, it is going to heal you for the difference, and then you're also going to do a little bit of lifesteal to that enemy. Pretty fun idea, pretty powerful defensive tool. Is also going to break stun for allies and give them just a single stack of stability. We saw the big stability over here on Rupture Preservation, but a nice little bonus stack of stability to your allies. And you can obviously give them the Zinray's weapon as well, so they can have a single instance of that defensive mechanic. Very good against things like kill shot, not as much against things like rapid fire, for example. So I'm going to take a quick water break for setup for our final burst through the traits. And anything you wanted to mention, Taylor?
No, I'm just calling out. There's a lot of, weapon spells have a lot of different uses. There's a lot of defensive ones, and the offensive ones are pretty different from each other. So it's going to be interesting seeing how this mixes with the kit that Necromancer already has. Has some pretty niche but really powerful supportive effects, I'd say. So seeing how it fills out when you want to play a support ritualist or even like a DPS ritualist that takes a couple of these should be interesting to see what people come up with.
Bone Minion Splinter Weapon. Alright, moving into the traits. Let's put on some random traits. This UI doesn't keep flashing one last time today. Kicking things off with the minor trait that explains the pressure mechanic. Spawning power, obviously a callback to the primary attribute of the Ritualist. A nice little nod here on a trait that doesn't actually do anything other than tell you how all of these things work. Next up, we're going to see Boon of Creation. This is going to be a little bit more of that life force generating type of trait. Every time you summon a creature, so a spirit or a minion, you're going to get some life force. So notably, you can use this outside of Shroud with minions in order to build up life force towards Shroud. When you're already in Shroud, you're going to be getting some life force back every time that you summon a spirit, so just giving you a little bit more uptime on those spirits as well, and just giving you that additional life force. Nice little, effectively a defensive minor trait here. Next up, as mentioned, Raptured Souls. This is going to be the thing that's actually giving you access to the Rupture Skills. We wanted these to be pretty powerful. You know, we saw a lot of damage, a lot of might, fury, obviously the huge boons here on Rupture Preservation. But we wanted to make these skills strong enough that we felt it is essentially the trait level strength of those effects, as opposed to making them significantly worse and then putting a different effect here in the Grandmaster slot. Moving into the adept traits, the first one here is kind of a fun one, Wandering Spirits. This is going to cause your spirits to basically follow you around, so we're just going to play around with spawn an Anguish, and the idea is that every time Anguish goes to auto attack or any of the other spirits go to auto attack, they're going to first move closer to your position. So not as relevant if you're fighting a stationary boss, but maybe you're running around the open world, and you're going to want your spirits to be following you around as you're moving, hopefully be near enemies still, such that your spirits will be attacking things, but this is giving you that opportunity to not have them locked to a single position when summoned. Next up, we'll take a look at Spirit's Gift. Add another one to your tally of Guild Wars 1 references, but this is another thing that makes a lot of sense. Every time you summon a creature, spirit, or minion, you will heal and remove conditions from nearby allies. We wanted to make this one trigger around yourself because if you are, throwing a Wonderlust, for example, out at an enemy to knock them down, we still wanted to give you that healing to you and your allies at your location. So this one does behave slightly differently in that it triggers around yourself. But this is another case where we kind of made an exception. Spirit's Gift will allow you to heal yourself when you are in Shroud, because a lot of the creatures that you are summoning are going to be in Shroud, whether or not you have minions. Next up, we have Explosive Growth, kind of the collection of Ritualist enchantment spells, because really what are traits other than enchantments that never expire? But Explosive Growth, every time you summon a creature, deal damage to enemies around that creature. So again, I'm going to run in, spawn my bone minions. That's going to do a couple of procs of Explosive Growth. You go into Shroud, summon some spirits. This one's going to be triggering around the enemies, because again, I'm going to spawn Wonderlust on top of my enemies, and I actually want that damage trigger to happen around them. So both of these traits kind of work the way that you would want them to, but a nice little potentially bursty damage trait here in the bottom of the adept slot. Next up, we're going to see Wielders Remedy. This is going to cause weapon spells to remove conditions, obviously from yourself and from allies. Similar mechanic, where allies get a slightly lower effectiveness here. You're going to cleanse 2 from yourself, remove 1 from allies. And that's just how it's going to be, a powerful defensive option if you have a bunch of weapon spells on your bar. Here in the middle, we have Empowering Spirits. This is going to be that boon trait. I'm going to give some quickness as in addition to other boons here when you summon a spirit. So every time you summon Anguish, you're going to give might and quickness to nearby allies. Then you're going to summon Wonderlust, give quickness and fury to nearby allies. And similarly, with the Spirit of Preservation, you will give resolution and quickness to nearby allies. So, pretty straightforward boon DPS trait. You're going to be going in this Shroud, summoning your spirits, giving some boons, and that's going to be quite useful. And last up, we have Spirit's Strength. Spirits deal more damage and their healing is increased. This one's pretty straightforward. Kind of plays into the more aggressive spirit builds where you're going to be summoning Anguish, Wonderlust. I mean, even Preservation does some damage. But this is going to affect both the initial attack here from Anguish as well as any follow-up auto attacks. Same idea with Wonderlust, where the initial damage coming from this pulsing field will be increased as well. And then also the auto attack, and finally Preservation is going to do additional healing in addition to additional damage on its auto attack, and and that healing burst that happens will also be increased by this trait. So this is just, leaning as heavily as you want into the spirit strength. They're significantly stronger. Three more traits to go. Kicking things off with Wielders Boon. This is kind of an additional weapon spell trait where now all your allies are going to get the full effectiveness. So this is, I mean, it's good with all of them. This is also going to work with Wielders Remedy. Whether or not it does right now, I have to double check because that was kind of a late adjustment, but it will give you the full effectiveness of Wielders Remedy as well, so 2 Connie removals. But now you can give your allies 5 stacks of Splinter Weapon. You can give them full duration of Resilient Weapon. You know, basically, if you are looking to get those powerful moments of the weapon spells, now you can get even more of that to your allies. And then the next trait is going to be Lingering Spirits. So this is something that we kind of alluded to in the blog post, where there is a way to get your spirits to persist outside of Shroud, and that is if you have the Lingering Spirits Grandmaster trait. So the way that this works is that anytime you exit Shroud and you still have life force remaining, just go in, let's spawn some spirits. I'm going to leave immediately with a full pool of life force. These spirits are going to continue to exist, and also the life force drain from Shroud is continuing to exist here. Notably, this makes the spirits attack a little bit faster as well, so you get a little bit of haste quickness of their attack interval. So, you know, if you're trying to maximize your damage from your spirits, you'll probably take like Lingering Spirits, Spirit Strength. That's going to be like the most sustained damage. And, you know, maybe you even have Wandering Spirits on because you're running around the open world, and now you're having this, you know, Spirit Army kind of following you around, attacking nearby enemies. And that will last as long as you have spirits active, or as long as you have the life force. It will kind of snapshot your life force pool when you exit, so you can't continue to build up life force on top of that. We'll see this here. It's giving you this buff for a duration. This is kind of based off how much it calculated Shroud time you had remaining as you exited Shroud. And, you know, we're going to be keeping a close eye on this one, whether the life drain needs to be a little bit higher when you're out of Shroud, but the idea is that you will be converting your remaining life force into duration of your spirits, and then the life force you gain on top of that will not be consumed by those spirits. It will just be building toward your next usage of Shroud. Importantly, if you do rupture all of your spirits, it will turn off and stop draining your life force, because, you know, it might feel bad if it did. And last but not least, we have, you know, one last Guild Wars callback to a powerful elite skill that some of you might have heard of. It's called Soul Twisting. Works pretty similarly. You can only get a single instance of this because it might be a little bit too broken if you could recharge all of your spirit skills instantly. But the first spirit skill that you use when entering Ritualist Shroud will recharge immediately. So we can see here, you know, go in, spawn Anguish, that's going to do its thing, then that's going to recharge immediately, so I can use Anguish again. It's going to trigger that Rupture Anguish, spawn a new Anguish, it's going to do its big burst again, and that's kind of an opportunity to get a burst of damage or a burst of CC if we want to use it with Wonderlust, or again a burst of healing using it with Preservation. You basically get to choose at the moment that you enter Shroud. You know that you can get a burst of one of these 3 spirits, do it twice. You know, Preservation, pretty good option because that's going to be triggering a Rupture Preservation, giving that stab resistance Aegis, and, you know, if you have enough life force, maybe it'll be still around the next time this skill becomes available. So some pretty powerful stuff that you can do with Soul Twisting. Get some healing, do it again, get some boons. Pretty strong stuff. And I mean, this trait's a lot of fun. Lingering Spirits is a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun traits, a lot of fun interactions, a lot of fun Guild Wars callbacks, but, you know, obviously it's not going to be exactly the same, but it is heavily inspired by. I think we're pretty excited about it. Love to get players' hands on it. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you don't like. And, you know, that's the Ritualist. I'll do one last hover of all the skills here, and then we're going to wrap up the stream for today. Any thoughts, Taylor, on the Ritualist?
I think just another disclaimer that the numbers you guys see as we hover everything are still in flux. We're actively tweaking them. A lot of like the initial things we put are very, very much vibe based. You know, before the beta, gonna go back through and make sure things are closer to how we want them. Obviously use the beta for, you know, fine tuning things. So some numbers might seem pretty crazy. Maybe they're not crazy. But just keep that in mind as you're looking at the value for things. But largely the functionality of the tooltips should be correct.
Bone minions, that's not a Ritualist skill. Maybe Maybe it will be for a number of the people in the chat. I love playing Minion Necro because all the minions get the ArenaNet guild tag when they follow you around, so, you know, maybe Ritualist is the Necro spec for me.
Yep.
Open a warding, Sinray's weapon, and I guess we should show off the Shroud skills one last time. Essence Blast, of course granting me might because I have the Spite trait line equipped. Spirit of Anguish.
Mm-hmm.
Spirit of Wonderlust. Is not a leap finisher. Don't believe the skill fact here. Spirit of Preservation. And last but not least, that's Summon Spirits. Alright, that one didn't have quite enough time. There we go. Plenty of time. Watch the VOD. Get your screenshots. I think that's all we have to cover here today.